Today, we're going to dive into a 400-year story that is woven right into the very fabric of America. We're going to trace the journey of Christianity, from a faith that wanted to build cities on hills to one that actually divided a nation, and from the fire behind a revolution to its really complex role here in the 21st century. So, let's get into it.
And really, it all boils down to this one central question. America is a nation that's defined by its diversity, right? Yet for centuries, a single faith has been at the absolute center of its most defining moments. So how did that happen? Well, that's exactly what we're here to unpack.
Okay, so our story starts in a new world, but with a very, very old faith. And I want you to think of the first European settlers not just as colonists, but more like gardeners. They were trying to plant the seeds of their specific beliefs in totally new soil.
Those first seeds were planted by groups looking for religious freedom, like the Pilgrims back in 1620, and they were followed just a decade later by the Puritans, who had an even bigger mission. And as the 17th century went on, more and more groups started to arrive. We're talking Baptists, Quakers, Methodists, and each one added a totally distinct branch to this rapidly growing tree.
And you have to understand, their ambition was just staggering. For a lot of them, especially the Puritans, the goal wasn't just to, practice their faith freely. No, it was to build an entire society, what they famously called a city on a hill, based entirely on their interpretation of the Bible. And that single idea, it would echo for centuries.
So that initial seed, well, it grew into a massive forest. But that forest also had to weather some incredible storms. This is the part of the story where we see explosive growth, powerful revival, and, some really deep division.
A huge moment of growth came from these explosive revivals known as the Great Awakenings. You had these incredibly charismatic preachers like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, and they completely shifted the focus from a kind of formal institutional religion to a powerful, emotional, and really personal relationship with God. This didn't just energize American faith, it kind of democratized it.
And right at the heart of this faith was this honestly revolutionary idea of spiritual equality, captured in verses just like this one. The belief that all people were equal in the eyes of God. Well, that became an incredibly powerful tool. But how it was used would become the nation's greatest test.
And this right here, this gets to the absolute core of the conflict. The very same Bible was used to justify the brutal institution of slavery and to inspire the abolitionist movement. You had pro-slavery advocates pointing to certain Old Testament passages to uphold social hierarchies. And at the exact same time, abolitionists were focusing on the core message of liberation in Exodus and spiritual equality in the New Testament. It literally split the nation and its churches right in two.
So as you can imagine, this faith didn't stay locked up inside church walls. In this next part, we're going to see how it moved firmly into the public square, actively shaping the American landscape, from its laws all the way to its social movements.
Now this part is fascinating, because influenced by these Christian ideals of freedom of conscience, the founders did something pretty unique. The First Amendment didn't create a Christian nation. Instead, it created a framework where faith could flourish without government control, by setting up both religious freedom and the separation of church and state.
And that separation didn't make faith a private thing. Actually, it was quite the opposite. You can see here a direct line of activism where people of faith took their principles and applied them directly to society. From the fight to abolish slavery, to the movement for women's right to vote, the social gospel's push for justice for the poor, and of course the civil rights movement, all of them were profoundly led and inspired by Christian ideals.
And no one personifies this more than the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. This famous quote, "It isn't just a political statement, it's a deep, profound declaration of faith." It's this belief that divine justice will ultimately win out. And that conviction is what fueled one of the most important social movements in all of American history.
Okay, so this brings us to our final section, the modern Christian landscape. After 400 years, what does that forest planted by those early settlers even look like today?
Well, for one thing, it's incredibly diverse. American Christianity is not a monolith. Not at all. It's this complex ecosystem of Protestant denominations, a huge and influential Catholic community, Orthodox churches, and so many other groups, and each one contributes to the whole.
And it is constantly evolving. The last century has brought these massive transformations. You had evangelicalism grow from a spiritual movement into a major cultural and political force. The rise of megachurches completely changed how millions of people experience worship. And today, Vibrant Hispanic Christian communities are one of the fastest-growing and most dynamic parts of American faith.
But today, all of these traditions are facing a totally new context. In a much more secular and pluralistic America, the number of people with no religious affiliation, they're often called the nones, is rising faster than any single denomination. And that presents a completely new challenge and a new reality for Christianity's place in the nation.
So, from a tiny seed of conviction planted on a new continent to a vast and complicated forest that has shaped a nation's highest ideals and its deepest conflicts, we're left with this final, open question. In this rapidly changing America, what will the next chapter be? The story, well, it's still being written.